It is rare to find women who are truly devoted to the end, with only a few exceptions. This is a well-known fact among men, with some worrying about it, some resigning themselves to it, and others choosing to ignore it altogether. I have been married to my wife for almost 40 years. We tied the knot when I was 20 and she was 19. Throughout our time together, we have experienced a range of ups and downs, arguments and reconciliations. However, I have always been confident that we have never betrayed each other. It's challenging to spend so many years with a stunningly beautiful woman without ever doubting her love and loyalty. Yet, no matter where life has taken me, she has always stood by my side. Together, we have raised two wonderful children, our son Paul and our daughter Katya. They are now adults with families and children of their own. I believe that a peaceful and contented old age, surrounded by cherished grandchildren, awaited us. I am a doctor, having served in the Army for 25 years and retiring as a colonel in the medical service. However, retirement is a strong word for my situation. Even now, I continue to work in a private clinic. Though my hands do not wield the scalpel as frequently due to age taking its toll, I still lead therapeutic consultations. My wife, Nastya, also remains employed in an advertising firm, utilizing her training as a designer. Can I say that we have faced financial difficulties? No, we simply work because it brings us joy and fulfillment. During my time serving in various places, I had the opportunity to visit different countries such as Africa, Mongolia, and Vietnam. Unfortunately, my work as a doctor, especially in the military, kept me occupied day and night, leaving little time for sightseeing. However, I always found solace in knowing that my loving wife and children awaited my return home. I had held on to the comforting belief that my wife's devotion was steadfast, despite her age. She had managed to preserve her natural beauty through careful self-care, maintaining her youthful figure and wrinkle-free face. Walking beside her, we often caused a stir, as her youthful appearance led others to mistake her for my young mistress. It was an obvious contrast. A young blonde with a mature, graying man. The playfulness of this situation amused both my wife, Nastya, and me. However, little did I know that this amusement was only temporary. Everything changed on a rainy November evening. Often it seems that life-altering events occurred during these bleak autumn nights when nature itself seems to be crumbling. The cold wind of early winter howled outside, causing the raindrops to dance on the window pane, serving as a constant reminder of the deteriorating world outside. Lost in thought, I sat at the kitchen table, sifting through my papers, desperately searching for my medical book. On Monday, I had a scheduled checkup at the polyclinic and needed to locate my vaccination card. Unfortunately, Nastya was not at home. She had gone to the town earlier in the afternoon to buy groceries and prepare Sunday dinner for us. I spent quite a while rummaging through old documents, some of which had turned yellow with time, and unexpectedly stumbled upon something that deeply shocked me. It was an excerpt from my wife's medical record, specifically dated during the period when I was away on a lengthy business trip and hadn't been home for almost a year. To my astonishment, it revealed details about Nastya's pregnancy and the premature birth of a baby 4 years after our daughter was born. The records included various tests and ultrasound results, indicating that Nastya had given birth to a premature baby at 6 months gestation, who tragically passed away after just 3 days. Furthermore, the document contained information about both Nastya's and the baby's blood types, revealing that the baby had a blood type of R-negative and type 3. This revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. The blood types indicated that I couldn't possibly be the father of this baby, as Nastya and I both have blood type O and rhesus positive. Our biological child could only have these specific blood parameters, not the ones stated in the document. And lastly, considering I was out of the country during that period, it was clear from the beginning that the child could not have been mine. I stared vacantly at the statement, my thoughts in disarray. Nastya's betrayal was unfathomable. While I had been away, she had managed to conceive a child. My mind raced with questions. Who was the father? Just half an hour ago, I believed I had a strong family, a loving wife, and a future filled with happiness. Now, everything seemed shattered. Taking a deep breath, I attempted to regain my composure. I carefully placed the certificates back in their proper spot and secured the extract I had discovered in my briefcase. Keeping a level head was crucial. The evidence of Nastia's infidelity was indisputable. I yearned for a confrontation, but realized it was important to clarify things first. Thoughts of our children weighed heavily on me. The 9-year age difference between Pavel and Katya was apparent. Both shared my blood type and resembled a younger version of myself. There was no doubt in my mind that they were mine. Yet this realization brought me no solace. I couldn't grasp why Nastia had done this to me. We had married out of love. I had courted her for almost a year, oblivious to the attention of other women. Despite my attractive appearance, my focus had always been solely on Nastia. She was the only woman in my life, my Nastia. Throughout our life together, my focus had always been on taking care of my wife and showering her with attention. It often felt like I had never even experienced the life of a single person before. She meant everything to me and so much more. But then everything changed. It felt like my heart was being crushed. Seeking solace, I stepped out onto the balcony to catch a breath of fresh air. As I looked down, illuminated by the dim glow of a street lamp, I noticed a car pulling up near our building's entrance. Soon after, my wife emerged from the car, accompanied by a man. He retrieved packages from the backseat, and Nastia swiftly pecked him on the cheek before grabbing the bags and heading into the driveway. The man settled into the driver's seat, and the car gradually faded away into the distance. The farther it went, the easier it was to bear. The sound of the front door lock clicking interrupted the silence. "Yura, are you home?" My wife's voice echoed through the house, surprisingly loud. Suddenly, I couldn't bear the volume and knew I had to find out what was going on right away. I came to see Marinka to have a serious talk. Nastia's voice lacked any emotion as she spoke. "Well, and I ended up staying longer than planned. I'll quickly cook something now," she continued. "Why do you look so upset?" Nastia leaned in to kiss me on the cheek, and I caught a hint of alcohol on her breath. "Oh, don't get all worked up. Marinka and I had a little champagne together," she said, wiping the lipstick off my cheek. "So she gave you a ride?" I tried my best to maintain a calm tone. Nastia looked at me with an unfamiliar expression, clearly unsure how to answer. "Yura, don't push it. I took a cab, or rather, I got a ride from someone I know," she replied, desperately searching for the right words. "What's the problem?" I asked, my heart pounding so loudly that I feared the neighbors could hear it. To distract myself and regain composure, I stood up and retrieved a full bottle of whiskey from the cabinet. Nastia looked at me fearfully. "How was I supposed to know?" she responded. "How was I supposed to know? I was standing on the balcony and saw you saying goodbye to the driver," I said, struggling to remain calm and not raise my voice. "A farewell kiss is common courtesy during a ride," I questioned, pouring myself a glass of whiskey. "Yura," Nastia exclaimed, clearly getting flustered. "What, Yura?" I retorted. "Take a seat. I have a few questions for you." I pulled a stool out from under the table and retrieved the unsettling document from my briefcase. "Nastia, what is this?" I placed the document in front of my wife, who cautiously flipped through a few pages before hastily pulling her hand away. "Where did this come from?" Nastia looked up at me, her eyes welling up with tears. Did you read it?" I reached for the glass, but couldn't bring myself to take a sip. After a moment of silence, she unexpectedly spoke in a calm voice. "It was bound to happen eventually, and maybe it's for the best that it happened now." She began to explain that during my prolonged absence, she had met a younger man whom she had fallen in love with. He was 11 years her junior, and the attraction was almost irresistible. Initially meeting for dates, they eventually reached a point where she would send the children to her mother's, and he moved in with her in our apartment. They began living as husband and wife, indulging in a passionate affair. During one of their intimate encounters, she became pregnant, and he even proposed to her. This revelation deeply unsettled me. How could she, a married woman and mother of our 2 children, succumb to such betrayal? Lost in her infatuation, she secretly hoped that I would never return and that they could continue their relationship. But something went wrong. The premature birth of their baby proved to be a tragedy, and the infant passed away only 3 days later. At this point, Nastia burst into tears, revealing that her focus had been solely on the loss of their newborn, rather than the well-being of our remaining children. After the death of our child, our relationship became strained, and we slowly grew apart, according to her perspective. Eventually, a young woman appeared in the picture, and my lover decided to leave me in search of new adventures. I was concerned and worried, but Nastia, taking our children with her, patiently waited for my return. When I came back, she greeted me as if nothing had happened, playing the role of a loving and caring wife for the following years. It completely shocked me. I was at a loss for words and thoughts. Silently, I stared at the wall, unable to think clearly. I was numb. But that wasn't the end of it. 6 months ago, her longtime friend arrived in town, and their passion reignited. It turned out that she had loved him all these years. My wife willingly surrendered herself to him, completely abandoning our marriage. They have been seeing each other behind my back all this time, and she now desires a new life without me. After 40 years together, where she gave me her best years, she now wants to start over with the man she loves. As she uttered those words, she knew the immense pain she was causing me. It felt as if she was an executioner coldly carrying out her duty. It's not personal, she says. It's just love. We can finally let it all out and drown our sorrows in a drink. What came next after downing the whiskey in one gulp? I repeated the action, pouring myself another glass. The drink had a peculiar effect on me, failing to bring me down despite its potency. Perhaps I was simply exhausted. Holding the bottle up to the light, I observed its color. Light brown, just as it should be for a well-aged Irish whiskey. Aha! I concluded that I needed to pour myself some more. But what was I even doing? Maybe pouring it straight from the neck was the way to go. After all, a good bottle of whiskey often has a wide and comfortable neck, similar to a decanter. Quite convenient, I must say. It nearly eliminates the need for a glass altogether. Across from me, Nastia sat quietly, leaving me slightly concerned. I wondered if something had happened, or if perhaps we had run out of kerosene. She had always been so adept at playing her role all these years. Without the discovery of the transcript, I may have never suspected a thing. Muloda, truly a woman with hereditary talents. And the words she uttered, it happens. Of course it happens. It's not a problem. It happens, that's all. I thought to close the window as a gust of cold air swept in. Getting up, I nudged the stool with my foot and made my way into the bedroom. Silently, I dressed myself and hastily packed a few belongings into a bag. I then headed towards the exit. Yura. A half-question lingered in the air. You shouldn't go out at this hour. I glanced at her. Her dark silhouette stood framed by the kitchen doorway. Aren't you going to say anything to me? She appeared on the verge of tears, or perhaps it was just my imagination. Poor girl, so nervous. I shrugged, opened the door, and stepped outside, being mindful not to bump the doorframe with my horns. Autumn awaited me outside as I stepped into the damp air. I took a deep breath, hoisted my bag onto my shoulder, and strolled leisurely down the sidewalk, adorned with a carpet of yellow leaves. A sudden craving for a cigarette struck me, prompting me to instinctively pat my pockets in search of one. Of course, I found nothing. It had been 20 years since I gave up smoking at Nastia's request, concerned for my health and longevity. The hour was late, and the city seemed to be succumbing to a restless slumber. The windows of the houses remained dimly lit, with only the streetlights casting a feeble glow upon the nearly deserted streets. Just as I was lost in my thoughts, my cell phone chimed, displaying Nastia's name. Worried about her husband she was. Deciding to distance myself momentarily from all worries, I silenced the phone and switched it off. Suddenly, a wave of desolation washed over me, and I found myself tightly clutching the collar of my coat, suppressing the urge to let out a despairing cry. It dawned on me then the magnitude of what had transpired. As if attempting to chase away the tormenting thoughts, I shook my head vigorously. What was to be done? Where should I go? The easiest choice would be to storm out with my head held high, slamming the door behind me. But then where would I go? To my children? They had their own share of troubles. Perhaps it was for the best that I had no mistress all these years, only dedicating myself to work, as though it were a solemn duty. I would spend the night there, and tomorrow I would make my final decision. I continued my slow walk, cautiously maneuvering around the dark houses, being mindful of not slipping on the wet fallen leaves. Just as I was lost in thought, a voice pierced through the darkness. "Excuse me, sir, do you happen to have a cigarette?" I turned around, and then I was consumed by darkness. Nastia delicately removed her lover's hand from her chest and quietly slipped out of bed. It was the first time in years they had shared their love without the fear of being discovered. She quickly put on a robe and made her way to the kitchen. There, she noticed an unfinished bottle of whiskey on the table. He never cleans up after himself, she thought to herself, her mind wandering to her husband. Yura, where did he go? He's not answering his phone. I don't know what happened. Nastia glanced out the window and saw the rain falling in the dark autumn night. A strange ache in her heart lingered, leaving her puzzled. Suddenly, a bright light flooded into her vision, blinding her momentarily. At last, a man's voice exclaimed nearby. Nastia turned her head slowly, struggling to grasp her surroundings. "Welcome back, Yuri Ivanovich," her boss said with excitement, peering at her. Confusion clouded her thoughts as she managed to murmur, "What? What happened? Where am I?" "You're at our clinic. You were brought to the emergency room tonight with a head injury. We found your ID and immediately contacted us. We swiftly operated on you, and the surgery was successful. You're back with us now. Your children and your wife have been notified. Your son is on his way here. The investigator said he'll be here this afternoon." "My wife? Do I have a wife?" Yuri questioned, his recent memories causing his heart to ache once again. A wife he never had. How confusing. The room's door creaked open, and Yuri's son Pavel entered, greeting his father with a kiss on the cheek. "Papa, hello. How are you? You really scared us." He placed a bag carefully on the nightstand, containing some fruit and juice, the only items allowed in the room. Pavel adjusted my blanket and informed me that my mother couldn't come yet, as she had urgent matters to attend to. I reassured him, saying she didn't need to come. Pavel seemed to know about our breakup. Perhaps Nastia had told him. But what could ex-wives possibly say in such situations? Enough with the tears, as Chingakuk the big snake used to say. The past doesn't count. 2 weeks later, I was discharged from the clinic. Nastia came to visit me twice, but I refused to see her. The past doesn't count. Initially, I rented a small apartment near my workplace and tried to adjust to single life. The breakup had a dual impact on me, the pain of betrayal and uncertain prospects. However, one thing was clear. I had no interest in pursuing new relationships with women. I had been inoculated against them. Then came the divorce, leaving me not only without a wife, but also without a home. The kids remained neutral, although it was evident they leaned toward their mother. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into my surgical duties to numb the heartache, and it worked. I didn't drown my sorrows in alcohol, unlike some abandoned husbands. About 2 months later, an old friend called and asked to meet up. "Yura, do you remember a few years ago when I borrowed a significant sum from you?" He started the conversation. I still remember it vividly. 3 years ago, Sergei found himself in a tough financial situation and turned to me for help. His business was facing serious troubles, and he had no one else to rely on. At the time, I had recently sold my mother's apartment and had the means to lend him a sizable amount of money. Without specifying a repayment deadline, I understood that Sergei wouldn't be able to return the money immediately. Sergei eventually managed to get his affairs back on track, but he didn't show any urgency in repaying his debt. Deep down, I was aware that asking for the money back could jeopardize our friendship. My father's wise words echoed in my mind. When you lend money to a friend, imagine you are gifting it. If you value that person, don't mention the debt. When the time comes, they will repay it if they can. I decided to trust in Sergei's goodwill. To my surprise, Sergei expressed his gratitude when we recently met. Thanks for extending your help back then. Now I'm doing extremely well, and my business has become more successful than ever, he said. I invested your money in the business, and it's been generating remarkable returns. He handed me a bank card, explaining that it represented the debt along with additional interest. The sum was 5 times the amount I had lent him initially. His gesture was truly helpful, as it allowed me to fulfill some personal dreams. With the money, I purchased a charming cottage on the outskirts of town and a new car. However, with my growing business responsibilities, I realized that I needed some assistance at home. That's when I decided to hire an assistant. The person I hired was a young woman, almost 15 years my junior. She had been married before for nearly 2 decades, but didn't have any children due to her infertility. Her ex-husband eventually left her for another woman, as I learned from a concerned neighbor. Natasha, as she was named, didn't openly discuss her past, and I had no personal intentions toward her except for her role as my assistant. It continued like this for nearly 6 months until one fateful day. While chopping wood, I suddenly felt unwell. A terrible headache struck and I lost consciousness. When I came to, I found myself in the hospital, with Natasha by my side. She had been the one to call the ambulance, and I was grateful for her quick thinking. The doctors arrived to find Natasha tenderly cradling my head in her lap. Thankfully, I was all right, but recovering from a head injury takes time. It was during this period of recuperation that I began to see Natasha in a new light. I realized just how beautiful she was, and our relationship took a turn towards intimacy. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to propose to her, and in the autumn, we got married. Knowing that we couldn't have children, we cherished our love and enjoyed our time together. However, about 3 months after our wedding, Natasha fell ill. She experienced vomiting and headaches, prompting me to rush her to the clinic I worked at. To our astonishment, it turned out that she had been pregnant for nearly 2 months. I remember Natasha telling me, determinedly, no matter what, I'm keeping the baby. I held her tightly, kissing her in the eyes, and it was in that moment that I realized a profound truth. Even when one door closes, fate has a way of opening another. Life started looking up, and just before New Year's Eve, I received a call from Nastya, her voice filled with pathos and pleading. "We need to meet," she said urgently. "I've made a reservation at a restaurant. Please come by 7 p.m. I'm begging you." And so Nastya sat across from me, her entire demeanor expressing humility and remorse. "Yura, I apologize. Not a single day went by without thoughts of you crossing my mind. Regrettably, I made a grave mistake. I betrayed you, our family, and our children." As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes. I remained silent, gazing at the woman who I had once passionately loved, a woman I would have sacrificed anything for. However, she had callously betrayed me twice without hesitation. For nearly 2 decades, she lied to me. She cut me out of her life and left for another man. And now, out of the blue, she had a change of heart and wanted to come back to me. Nastya kept insisting that the time apart made her realize how much she truly loved me. She claimed that I was the only substantial presence in her life. It reminded me of the sirens in Greek mythology, weaving their enchanting melodies to lure unsuspecting victims. Her words lingered, tempting me to believe that I was the sole possessor of her heart. I'm sorry," she repeated like a chant. I couldn't help but stare at her heavily coated lips, which once uttered affectionate words to me, now imagining them entwined with her lover's. Did she truly expect me to believe her claims? That she was confused, unaware of her desires? That this woman, who cheated on me, had a child with another man, abandoned me, and spent her free time with someone else, now returned solely out of love for me? In due time, she easily found an excuse for her cruel behavior and left me without any hesitation. Her involvement with her lover's sensual pleasures had become more important than anything else, and she callously plotted to deliver the final blow to me. Now she stood before me, offering the only valuable thing she had left, which had already been used and discarded by her lover. She had come to realize that she was merely a source of amusement and financial support, with no future or security in that relationship. Realizing all of this, she came crawling back to me, hoping to regain what she had lost. It was disheartening to see how she perceived me, as someone foolish enough to believe her lies. I listened to her remorseful words in silence, but I had nothing to say in return. I didn't take pleasure in her humiliation or revel in her downfall. Instead, I felt a twinge of pity for her. Though we had spent 40 years together, our encounter had reached its end. Just as I was about to bid farewell, my phone rang. It was Natasha calling to inquire about my whereabouts. I shared the address and said my goodbyes. Nastya, with tearful eyes, questioned if this woman was indeed mine. I confirmed her assumption, and she asked how long we had been together. When I replied with almost a year and a half, Nastya could only remark, "That's how it happens." I rose from my seat and told her, "Goodbye, Nastya. I hope you find happiness." As I exited the restaurant, I couldn't help but glance back. Nastya stood by the festively decorated window, her hands clasped to her chest, gazing at me. Amidst the bustling crowd around me, people hurriedly going about their lives, I couldn't shake off the feeling that life was continuing without a care. Across the street, a garish Coca-Cola advertisement flashed with intrusive lights. "Drink and feel the joy," they claimed. I had tried it before, and it was nothing but a lie. Climbing into the car, I turned the ignition key, and the engine purred with a smooth tranquility. Making a left turn, I seamlessly merged with the constant stream of hurried cars.